It's been a year since I joined Hero Wars. On a summer day just like today, my faithful homies went to the forest and never returned. As it turned out, they were attacked by a bunch of accursed heroes. A red-headed she-fiend with a chain gun, her loyal priestess of light with a staff, a fiery demon with a reaper's scythe, and a ruthless knight clad in shining armor.
Oh my god, stop it! They're still just kids.
My servants fought with all they had, almost securing a victory. But all of a sudden, swords began raining down from the sky, shredding them to pieces. Watch the story unfold in Hero Wars. Join the game now and get a super chest with 5 top heroes. One of them is a secret, as well as 600 emeralds and 30,000 gold. Scan the QR code or download the game from the link below in the video description, and I'll see you in the Hero Wars. The single worst day of my life started in the unlikeliest of ways, when I took a trip to visit my grandpa over near Omaha, Nebraska. First problem I ran into was the lack of cell signal out there in the sticks. No internet meant my GPS started going haywire, and I've never been great at reading maps. That, and there are basically no road signs anywhere, and the ones that are there are in such bad shape you can barely read them, even if you slow down when passing them. So, in the end, I had to actually stop at some guy's house to ask directions, and the fact that he didn't seem to know where I was talking about didn't fill me with confidence. He mentioned knowing of an old house off a dirt road, maybe a mile or 2 away from his own. He said it wouldn't be the easiest to find, but he was basically 75% sure that I was close. So, off I went, headed in the direction he was pointing, hoping that I'd make it to my grandpa's before lunchtime. A few minutes later, I spotted a dirt road turnoff that I thought might be the one that he was talking about. But after driving down it for a few minutes, I didn't see any houses or anything, so I figured that I made a wrong turn. Not surprising considering how crappy the infrastructure was, but it was still pretty frustrating. But then luckily, I saw a driveway out of nowhere, and I got my hopes up thinking that it was my grandpa's place. It wasn't, as there was a bunch of dudes with a van and a car all stood around talking, and my grandpa wasn't one for company. But I at least figured that I could ask them for some more directions. So that's what I do. But the second I turned into the driveway, I noticed the guy standing around started to act a little anxious. One guy immediately tears away from the little circle they had going. Another starts looking around as if though he was expecting other people to show up or something. I realized that I just interrupted something private. I just didn't realize the danger I'd driven into. Right as I stopped the car, I hear one of the guys say something to another like, "He with you?" Then I took my eyes off of them for a second as I reached for the road map I had. Right as I stopped the car, I hear one of the guys say something to another like, "He with you?" Then I took my eyes off them for a second as I reached for the road map I had. Then, when I looked up again, all I see is a gun pointing at me through my driver's side window. I realize now that in the few seconds that followed that I was just waiting for the guy to pull the trigger. I can't remember thinking anything other than gun, but I didn't move. I just froze. I didn't try to back out or duck or anything, I just sort of waited for everything to turn black. Like on a nature documentary when a deer gets caught by a tiger or something, and they just sort of go limp as they're thinking, well, this is it. Seconds later, I hear the guy with the gun saying, "Turn off the engine." Then when I do, he follows up with, "Get out of the car." I do as he says, feeling my knees wobble a little as I step out onto the dirt outside. I didn't think I could get any more scared, but I was wrong. Because when another guy spoke next, I felt like I honestly could have made an actual mess in my shorts. This guy just pipes up, "He's a cop, man. Just shoot him. Let's get out of here." That suddenly roused me from being all frozen and silent with fear, and I just started saying, "I'm not a cop. I swear to God I'm not a cop. I'm just looking for Grandpa's place. Please don't shoot me. Please. I'm not a cop. Please believe me." It all came out in one long, frenzied sentence, and I can't really write it all into this, but I was stammering, shaking. My voice was breaking. I was just a mess. I think this was the same guy who said, "He's lying. Just kill him. We can't lose this shipment." That was the only clue I had as to what was going down at that meeting, and I've agreed with a few other people's suggestions that it was drug-related. I didn't know this at the time, but Douglas County, the county that Omaha is in, has a huge meth problem, probably the biggest in the entire country. And as myself and many others suspect, I accidentally stumbled across a meth deal, probably a pretty big one considering some of the hardware on display. Not only did I have some kind of pistol in my face the whole time, but one of the other guys emerged with the kind of gun I've only ever seen on Call of Duty. I'm talking the kind with all kinds of attachments and stuff on it. Like I said, there was a hot minute there where I really did think that I was about to die. But when I heard the guy with the pistol trained on me say, "Get the tape," I started to think that they might have something even worse in mind for me. What's weird though is that even though that didn't mean that they were going to kill me, my survival instincts told me, at least that buys us a little more time. Thinking about it, letting them tie me up like they did could have secured my death, not helped me avoid it. But still, I just let them do what they did in the hopes that compliance might lead to mercy. They put tape over my eyes as well as around my wrists and ankles. They made me kneel in the dirt as they frisked me. I'm pretty sure they searched my car too, and I mean it when I said that they had some serious hardware, because I'm assuming you need something pretty advanced to tell if there's no secret recording equipment on a car. One of the guys said, "Car's clean for bugs," at one point, and that made me realize those guys weren't your average crankheads. I piped up again that I wasn't a cop, that they could search me all they liked, but they wouldn't find a badge or a gun or anything like that. That didn't seem to satisfy them though, and they kept arguing among themselves about what to do with me. I know they took out my license at one point because I could hear them passing something around, asking each other, "You know this guy?" Or, "You recognize him?" Stuff like that. I can't even describe how relieved I was when I heard them all agree that they'd never seen me before, and that I probably wasn't any kind of undercover cop or anything. I was praying that meant they wouldn't kill me, but at the same time, I knew it meant that I was still in quite a bit of trouble. Not long after that, they started discussing what they were going to do with me. The guy who had been suggesting they kill me kept on making that suggestion, but then the guy who ordered me tied up, the same one who first pulled a gun on me, he kept telling him to shut up, saying that killing me was a bad idea, that it'd only bring down more heat on them. During those few minutes of pure terror, he was like my best friend in the world. As if it had been the bloodthirsty one in charge, I definitely wouldn't be around to write this. But then, right as it seemed like I was going to get away unharmed, the boss of the group seemed to have a sudden change of heart. He said something like, "You know what? I think you might be right. We can't risk it. He's probably a do-gooder who's gonna go straight to the cops." I started wailing about how I wasn't, how I'd never snitch, how I'd just drive off and forget what I saw, causing them no trouble whatsoever. But that just didn't seem to do the trick, and when I heard the boss doing something with his gun, I begged him over and over not to kill me. I tried everything, reminding him that it would be too much trouble, that I was sorry for interrupting them, that I didn't see anything, but not a word that came out of my mouth seemed to change his mind. I haven't even finished talking when I felt him press the gun to the back of my head, and as I felt myself starting to cry under the tape they'd wrapped around my eyes, I wished I'd never gotten out of bed that morning. The last thing I heard him say before he pulled the trigger was, "Start digging a hole." And then, after every muscle in my body seemed to tense up in preparation for oblivion, I heard the trigger pull with a dull click that seemed to echo around my skull. But then, there was nothing. No bang, no pain, no blood or brains. I wasn't falling forward or backward or whatever. I was still just kneeling there, tensed up, feeling the pee trickle down my thigh, sadly. And all I could hear was laughter. They were all laughing at me, laughing at how I'd begged and pleaded with them not to kill me, when it was all just some cruel prank to instill the fear of God into me. And let me tell you, it worked. I felt the hot breath of the boss on my neck as he must have leaned down to tell me something like, "Keeping your license. Anything happens, I'm sending someone to pay you a visit. Think of it as an insurance policy. And next time, there'll be one in the chamber." I was later told this was called dry firing, or something like that anyway, where you fire a gun with nothing in the chamber so all it does is click real loud. Or at least, it felt loud to me. After that, they tossed me in the backseat of a car, and from the very short distance that I was moved, I figured that I was back on my own. Not long after, I heard engines gunning, then moving vehicles, then silence. They left me there, in the back of my car, tied up and blindfolded for what felt like days. In reality, it was only around 24 hours, and if a passing farmer using the back roads hadn't spotted me, there's a chance I might have died of dehydration. My phone had upwards of 50 missed calls. I'd been reported missing by my parents. It was a whole ordeal. And obviously a big part of what followed was being questioned by the police. I didn't ask to talk to them, but considering how I was found, my parents wanted me to talk. I just stonewalled the deputy who showed up, and told my parents why I'd refused a word about what happened. That was honestly the worst part. Having my own life threatened, and being subjected to what amounted to a mock execution, that was one thing. But having my own mom and dad realize that they were no longer safe in their own home, that was another thing entirely. We moved a short while after that, living with family in Des Moines for a few weeks after we could find an apartment, which mom and dad then used as a base to sell their house. Every so often, the cruel, maddening chaos of it all hits me all at once. All that, our entire lives uprooted, all because of one wrong turn I made on a dirt road, out in Douglas County, Nebraska. A few years back, I was out elk hunting with my brother up in Alberta, Canada. That morning, my hunting buddy Paul and I were headed out to hunt near the Simonette River, but I only had my rifle with me since Rob didn't have a big game license at the time. As some of you might know, the banks of the Simonette are very much considered bear country, and since one half of our hunting party was very vulnerable without a firearm, we hit up the nearest ranger station and asked about bear sightings. The ranger was very helpful and warned us that there was definitely a grizzly in the area. They had been tracking sightings for weeks though, and the ranger told us that if we stuck to certain trails and avoided others, we might be able to stay out of the bear's territory, which would lower our chances of encouraging it. That might seem silly to people who understand how vast a grizzly's territory can be, but up here we believe that mitigation can be just as effective as outright protection. Anyway, we had been walking for about an hour or so. Because there was a fresh blanket of snow on the ground, it was much harder to recognize where each trail turned off, etc. Suddenly, we both realized that we might have taken a wrong turn a mile or so back, because we didn't seem to recognize where we were. We decided to make our way back to the truck so we could better orient ourselves, when we suddenly noticed fresh wolf tracks in the snow. Wolves generally aren't as dangerous as bears, as they're way too smart to attack humans, but it still meant we got a little tense as we carried on padding through the snow in dead silence. Moments later, we caught a glimpse of an animal carcass just laying there in the snow, and it was only barely touched with no other scavengers near it. This was a huge red flag to us, as the crows tend to descend on anything that doesn't have an apex predator near it, so we both started to worry that we were about to encounter something we really didn't want to. I loaded my rifle as we slowly approached, thinking we might be in for a close encounter with a wolf or a wolf pack. who would be wanting to defend the carcass, obviously. As we both scanned the area, extremely on edge by that point, I heard this low calling sound, but this huge spruce seemed to be blocking my view of where it was coming from, so I couldn't exactly see what was making it. That's when Paul suddenly let out this terrified, high-pitched cry of grizzly. And then the next second, all I see is this huge bear charging right at him. If you haven't seen how fast a grizzly can charge, it's hard to imagine how such a lumbering beast can achieve such frightening speeds. But I can assure you, when they want to, those things can fly at you like a freaking fury cannonball. It is truly terrifying to behold. The bear moved so fast that I barely had time to react, and definitely not enough time to raise my rifle to actually aim. But still, I had to get a shot off even if it was just to scare it, so I tried my best to aim from the hip and hit the bear in the head. I turned, fired, and nothing. The bear didn't even so much as flinch. Luckily, Paul was able to take cover behind these two trees that were pretty close together, so they acted kind of like a palisade between him and the bear. The grizzly took a swipe at him, missed, and then just kept moving around the tree before turning in my direction. I don't think I can even really describe the kind of terror I felt in that moment. It's like nothing I've ever felt before or since. We, humanity I mean, spend so much time dreaming up imaginary monsters for books or movies or comic books, when there are real-life monsters just walking the earth alongside us. And up near the Simonette that day, I had one charging right at me. It must have been no more than 8 meters away from me when I reloaded my rifle and fired again. That time I actually hit it, and I saw a spray of blood in the air from where the bullet tore through its shoulder. But to my horror, it just didn't seem to flinch that time either. I had to fall back onto my butt to dodge the swipe it took at me, and as I kept on crawling back through the snow, I just couldn't get the leverage to properly reload my rifle. It took another swipe at me, but I knew then that it must have pulled a bullet through its arm or shoulder because the force wasn't as powerful as I thought it would be, and I saw a few drops of blood hit the snow in front of me. It probably realized that it wouldn't be able to kill me just with its claws, so that's when the bear opened up its mouth to bite me, lunging forward as I lay there in the snow. I didn't really plan on it. What I did next was all out of pure instinct, but I just shoved my gun barrel towards it to try and keep it from biting me, and I watched the barrel disappear down its throat. It actually bit down on that thing, and I swear I heard one or two of its teeth shatter as it chewed on the cold steel for a few seconds. It pushed the rifle butt down onto me, and that gave me the leverage I needed to actually work the bolt again to put another round in the chamber. Seconds later, I pulled the trigger and sent a bullet either right through its brain or through its spine, because it just went completely limp and rolled onto its side in the snow. The whole event lasted no more than maybe 20 or 30 seconds, but it was the most terrified I've been in my entire life. But the aftermath was probably worse. You'd think that after surviving something like that, you'd be all like, man, screw that bear. But I just felt this sickening regret. Grizzlies are beautiful animals, and if there were another way, I would have let it live, but it just didn't give me that option. In that moment, it was either it or me. There was no reasoning with it, no negotiating with it, no communicating with it outside of pure violence. And I think that's what scares me about nature most of all. How one of humanity's most powerful tools is our power to communicate. But out there in nature, it's almost useless. If Mother Nature wants you dead, there's no stopping it. Either you die or it dies. There is no in between. Back in the 1950s, my grandpa used to sell vacuum cleaners door to door all over the country. He was one of the last great American traveling salesmen, the kind Arthur Miller wrote about, but with considerably less family trauma. He used to say how he had his fair share of close encounters with bad folks, as he called them, but he also had this one story that really stuck with me for obvious reasons. So, he's down in Florida when he runs into a friend of his out on the road, a guy who sold steam irons. The guy tells him that he just visited a place where the homeowner already owned a steam iron but was in the market for a vacuum cleaner. This is way back when Walmarts didn't exist, and getting a hold of items like that was way tougher than it is now. Plus, this guy was an old-timer who didn't get out all that much. Anyways, he gives my grandpa the hint. Grandpa thanks him, then heads out to look for the property. He's following the guy's directions to the letter, and he's even got a description of the guy's house too, so when he turns down some old dirt road and the house didn't look like the one described, he figured that he'd probably made a wrong turn. Lo and behold, the number is different on the mailbox, but given how he was already there, he figured that he'll try and sell a vacuum anyhow. Then, as he's walking up to the guy's door, he sees this real lifelike alligator statue thing on the guy's front porch. Then as he gets closer, he realizes it had to be stuffed or something because it's super realistic. It's just not moving or anything. He gets within about 3 feet of the guy's door, and he's got his eyes glued on this creepily realistic gator when out of nowhere, the gator statue blinks. My grandpa said he froze. Then right as he did, the gator turns its head and hisses. He turns and bolts back to his car, and the whole way he can hear this thing chasing him. Then when he gets to his car door and turns around, it's like right there trying to bite at his ankles. Said he'd never been so scared in all his life. The guy had a freaking guard gator. Not a guard dog, a guard gator. So my grandpa just guns his car engine and gets out of there. A few years ago, I had this really erratic schedule where I had to get up super early for school before going to my part-time job until 10 or 11 at night. I think there was about 3 months there where I didn't get any more than about 5 hours of sleep at night, and after a while, it started to have a really terrible effect on me. I found my memory started to become shot, my mood was seriously affected, and life in general just got really, really tough. I started making basic mistakes on a daily basis, and while some were just irritating, one almost cost me my life. It was when I was driving home one night, and although I made the same journey maybe 100 times before, my overtired brain was at a breaking point, and I made a wrong turn. I know what you're thinking. That's just a minor inconvenience. I could have just turned around and corrected my course. But this wrong turn was down a one-way street, and as fate would have it, some motocross-mounted joyrider was coming the other way doing maybe 40 to 50. There wasn't a thing I could do about it, and the kid had no helmet on either, so the second I hit him, his head smashed right through my windshield, his body stopping only as his shoulders hit the crunched-up glass. It was the most horrific sight I've ever seen in my entire life. The kid's head was almost completely split open. There was no way he was alive, at least, that's what I thought at first. But then, as my screams finally died down, I could hear him groaning, with all these gurgles coming from where there was blood or something in his throat. I heard those sounds in my nightmares for months afterwards. The kid died on his way to the hospital, and I thought I was going to go to prison over it. I mean, I honestly believed that I deserved to go to jail for a long time. It took a lot for people to talk me down and tell me that the kid was ripping it down a street on a stolen bike, wearing no helmet, and if he hadn't made that choice, he'd still be alive. I just made one dumb mistake, but the kid had made a fatal, criminal one. I still can't really justify it to myself, and even though the state didn't choose to prosecute, his mom tried to make a civil suit to get some money out of me. I tried to offer her enough to cover the kid's funeral, but she wanted more. She wanted to see me in court. But then the whole civil suit was thrown out because of the whole Grand Theft Auto thing. I understand where she was coming from, though. She didn't want it to be nice and respectful or like charity. She wanted to take something from me, just like I'd taken something from her. I still go to therapy over the whole thing, and I sometimes still see that kid's face in my dreams, the way his eye was bulging out with his head split open. But somehow he was still alive. groaning and gurgling his final breaths away, all because I went the wrong way down a one-way street. On March 14th of 2014, two Dutch students named Lisanne Vroon and Chris Kramers traveled to Panama for an adventure vacation. They planned to do their fair share of relaxing on the golden sands of Panama's beaches, but they also had their hearts set on some selfless humanitarian work. Before their departure from their native Holland, the girls had contacted a school in a small town on the Caldera River named Boquete, asking if they needed any volunteers during the upcoming semester. Their assistance was eagerly accepted by the understaffed and under-resourced escuela, but upon arriving in the village a few weeks early, they discovered that it wasn't all that they'd hoped for. Chris Kramers wrote in her diary that the villagers were rude and not at all friendly, and that their trip had proven to be a real disappointment. In order to offset what a letdown the initial phase of their trip had been, the two girls planned to hike around the active Baru volcano on April 1st of 2014. The 3-mile hiking trail that surrounds the Baru volcano is relatively easy to explore, but as the two girls set off from Boquete at around 11 a.m., it proved to be one of the last times anyone would see them alive. Accompanied by a local dog named Blue, Lisanne and Chris walked along the Pianista Trail, stopped only at an inn to ask directions. It's not clear why the innkeeper would do so, but it was later discovered that he advised the girls to immediately take a taxi back into Boquete. None of the local villagers would admit to there being any kind of threat of danger on the Pianista Trail. But if that was the case, why would the innkeeper advise the girls to immediately call off their hike? The Boquete villagers began to suspect something terrible had happened when the dog, Blue, returned from the hike unaccompanied. But for some reason, they waited until the following day to report Lisanne and Chris missing. Again, it's not clear why they would wait to do this, and it suggests that they knew of something dangerous on the trail, something that was to be avoided for at least 24 hours. 2 days later, the girls' family became concerned by the lack of communication and reported them missing to local authorities. Their report sparked a search of the surrounding area that was conducted both on foot and using aerial assets, but not a trace of either girl could be found. Just less than a week after they first went missing, the Vroon and Kramers families became so racked with worry that they flew out to Panama to assist in the search and were accompanied by members of the Dutch police's missing persons department. The Dutch police officers interviewed the Boquete villagers and were told that it was more than likely that the two girls had taken a wrong turn on the mountain somewhere and were simply lost in the forest. Yet it didn't take long for the detectives to notice some serious inconsistencies in the villagers' stories, and they became suspicious that the girls had been the victim of some kind of criminal activity. Over the next 10 weeks, search teams led tracker dogs through the stretches of forest that the two girls were believed to have traversed, but again, not a trace of the two girls could be located. Authorities would have to wait until June of 2014 for any kind of break in the case, and this came in the form of a woman from the local Nagabe tribe who showed up at a police station with something very disconcerting in her possession. The woman had found a blue backpack that she claimed she found along the bank of a nearby river. The backpack contained sunglasses, a camera, 2 cell phones, money, 2 bras, a water bottle, and Lisanne Vroon's passport. Investigators immediately set about analyzing Lisanne's phone, and it was through this process that they discovered something as confusing as it was disturbing. The phone had remained active for almost 10 days after the pair had initially gone missing, and during this time, they had made repeated attempts to summon help for themselves. They had made a number of 112 calls, which is the Dutch emergency number, as well as using 911 in an attempt to contact Panamanian emergency services. A number of these calls actually connected for a time, but due to a poor cell reception in the area, the longest of them lasted only 2 seconds before the signal dropped. Not long after the analysis of Lisanne Vroon's phone, Chris Kramers was located a short distance away, and after a similar analysis was performed on it, authorities discovered something very frightening indeed. Someone had locked Chris's phone by entering the wrong PIN code on several different occasions, powering it on one final time on April 11th, before both phones would be switched off until they were found. The phone's activity had initially suggested that at least one of the girls remained alive around 5 days after they went missing. But the locking of Chris's phone through incorrect PIN code entries told them something very different and reasserted the possibility of there being criminal activity. Obviously, both the authorities and the girls' families found this all deeply concerning, but it wasn't until they examined the girls' camera that a truly terrifying scenario began to unfold. The camera's memory card contained more than 100 pictures, with the first 50 or 60 consisting of regular tourist-style photographs of the two girls smiling or posing. Yet as investigators continued to scroll through the pictures, the tone of the images began to shift dramatically. One photograph showed Chris Kramers with a look of pure terror on her face and was dated around the time the girls began to contact emergency services. The remainder of the photos were taken from April 8th between the hours of 1 a.m. and 4 a.m. and depicted seemingly random objects like a stick with plastic sticking to it, clumps of foliage, a canyon, or a bridge. Investigators suggested that due to the steady framing of the shots, they were intentionally taken, perhaps to serve as trail markers to help the young women navigate their route, or even as a way for rescue workers to locate them should they have discovered the camera before the girls themselves. The girls may have also been using the camera's flash as a light source or perhaps to scare off predatory animals, but there were others who suggested that neither Froon nor Kramers took the photos and that a potential abductor had taken them while playing with the camera. Lisanna Froon's parents were extremely upset when they saw the rough and frightened state their daughters were in, and begged the authorities not to release any of them to the public. Yet despite their wishes, a Panamanian news channel accidentally leaked some of the photos, and the same thing happened back in Holland. The latter featured a picture which appeared to show the back of one of the girls' heads, and whoever it was sporting a rather severe head wound, with blood matted in her hair. The leak sparked off wild speculation that not only had the girls been kidnapped, but that an attacker had actually taken pictures of his victims to serve as a kind of grim series of trophies. After the discovery of the backpack, the search teams shifted to the area it was found, scouring the banks of the Rio Culebra along the small village of Alto Romero. Alto Romero was a long way from the trail that Kramers and Froon originally set out for, further cementing the idea that they had somehow gotten lost after taking a wrong turn. Shortly after the teams commenced with their new search area, they found a bunch of Chris Kramers' clothing by the river's edge. Each item had been neatly folded and placed on the river's edge and appeared to be on the opposite side of the bank from where the photographs had been taken. Some suspected that local tribesmen had found the discarded clothes and had folded them neatly in the hopes that someone might return for them. This led to a great number of them being questioned in relation to the girls' disappearance, but none admitted to seeing them, either alive or dead. 2 months after the search teams focused their efforts around Alto Romero, the first human remains were finally discovered. One of the search teams discovered a hiking shoe behind a tree along the same stretch of river where Lisanna's backpack had been found. Initially, they believed that it was just another spare item of clothing, but upon further inspection, the shoe contained a severed human foot. By the end of August, DNA analysis had successfully determined that the foot had belonged to Lisanna Froon, and further searches had turned up pieces of rotten flesh that were a DNA match for Chris Kramers. It was a heartbreaking revelation for the girls' families, as it meant that the chances of their daughter's survival were extremely slim. Yet the question remained, how on earth did their bodies end up in such a gruesome state of dismemberment? It took until March of 2015, almost a year after Kramers and Froon traveled to Panama, for investigators finally to reach their ultimate conclusion. In their eyes, the two girls most likely suffered some sort of tragic accident along the trail after becoming lost in the forest. The catastrophic ankle break that Lisanna suffered suggested that she had fallen a great distance before passing away either in or near the river. Chris Kramer had probably then attempted to climb down the cliff face in the dark, but due to the low light conditions, could not find Lisana or her way back to the trail. Chris had then died somehow while trying to exit the forest, leaving Lisana dead or dying somewhere in the darkness. Her remains then decomposed, and thanks to the river and the intense tropical rainfall, had ended up scattered for miles down the river. For some, there was finally a solid resolution to the mystery, but for others, morbid mysteries still abounded. One of the staff writers of the Panamanian newspaper La Estrella de la Coryat claimed the authorities had completely botched their handling of the case. She reported there was no chain of custody established for the recovered evidence or any human remains. She also reported that the 30-plus fingerprints found on the backpack not only remain unidentified, but that not a single one of the indigenous people involved with the case had their prints recorded in order to eliminate them from suspicion. The reporter also raised additional concerns over the analysis of the girl's camera and phones, claiming that the condition of the equipment was inconsistent with the places it was discovered. She claimed to have seen photographs of the equipment and argued that the lack of damage to the items was extremely suspicious, almost as if though the police had recovered them from a home or dwelling and not from the rainforest as they'd previously claimed. The reporter also said that only a skin-deep analysis on the camera had been performed, and that although it was possible to scour the memory cards for pictures that had been deleted, the Panamanian police had completely neglected to do so, even though this could have provided vital clues as to exactly what happened on the day of the girl's death. Panamanian lawyer Enrique Arocha, who was employed by the heartbroken Kramer's family, also voiced his concerns regarding the handling of evidence. He claimed despite reports to the contrary, no forensic investigation was conducted at the site the girls' bodies were found. On top of this, many of the investigation sources remain completely unverified, meaning for all intent and purposes, police officers could have simply fabricated them. But perhaps most disturbing of all, Enrique claimed that neither Chris nor Lisana's skulls were ever recovered, and that despite intensive searches of the area around Alto Romero, the most important pieces of their skeletons were never found. If the two girls died of accidental injuries, it seems extremely unlikely that neither's skull would ever be recovered, and Enrique believes that this is the most compelling evidence of foul play in the entire case. In light of law enforcement's mismanagement of the girls' deaths, a number of conspiracy theories and suggestions of cover-ups have gathered momentum. Some critics have asserted that the indigenous tribespeople of the area may have murdered the two girls, and are now masking their involvement in the crime by turning over evidence and pretending to cooperate. Some have even argued that the missing thigh bones and skulls are evidence that the two girls were cannibalized following their deaths. Others have suggested that the girls fell victim to narcos or organ traffickers, which would explain why their bodies were in pieces. While there is no shortage of theories regarding the grim truth of what happened that day, one common thread runs through all of them, and that's how the Panamanian authorities have remained suspiciously quiet and inactive regarding the investigation during the years that followed. It's entirely possible that this was done to protect Panama's tourism industry, which is essential to its fledgling economy. Yet others have suggested that narco-traffickers have paid off key members of the government in order to prevent international authorities from discovering their involvement in the girls' deaths and hindering their multi-million-dollar businesses. When all is said and done, the key question in this case is, did someone actually murder Chris Kramers and Lisana Prune? Or was it all just a horrible accident? As much as the Panamanian government might be uncomfortable admitting it, between the years 2009 and 2017, 24 other tourists have either gone missing while hiking in Panama or have turned up dead under extremely mysterious circumstances. In 2017, independent journalists from both Panama and the United States conducted an investigation into the deaths and disappearances, with each coming to the same conclusion, that they might all be the work of an unidentified serial killer. Leaked forensic documents suggested someone dismembered the young women and scattered the remains deliberately, which is exactly what seems to have occurred with many of the other victims. The most insidious and dangerous thing about this particular case is that, in covering up such a frightening series of murders, the Panamanian authorities aren't just denying justice to the Froon and Kramers families, they're essentially digging the graves of many more victims. If there really is a serial killer at work, targeting tourists on the jungle trails of Panama, there's certainly no shortage of potential victims to choose from. So if you're planning a trip down to Panama, maybe avoid hiking around the Pianista Trail, as you might have to worry about something far more terrifying than jaguars. On February 7th of 2018, 49-year-old Canadian firefighter Danny Philippidis was on a skiing trip at the Whiteface Mountain in Wilmington, New York. The event was a regular annual event attended by both active and retired firefighters, and on the day in question, Danny and his 8 companions decided to ski one of the highest peaks in the Adirondacks. All could have been considered accomplished skiers, but even the hardiest of athletes would have found this particular run to be thoroughly exhausting. So in the mid-afternoon, the majority of Danny's group decided to call it quits. Danny, however, wanted one more run before he retired for the day, with his friends waiting for him at a ski lodge about halfway down the mountain. Yet just as they were awaiting his arrival, one of the worst snowstorms of the decade struck Whiteface Mountain, rendering visibility almost non-existent. Naturally, Danny's friends were extremely concerned for his well-being, and when he failed to return at the time they expected him to, they ventured up to the resort that they were staying at to report him missing. Search and rescue teams began to scour the mountain for any sign of the missing firefighter, but despite an all-night search of the area, Danny was nowhere to be found. The following day, scores more joined the search teams, including state police, the U.S. Border Patrol, and dozens of civilian volunteers. Some theorized that Danny had simply packed up his belongings and gone back to Canada, but a search of his hotel room revealed that he'd left his passport and other essentials behind, meaning he had to be somewhere in the vicinity. When word of Danny's disappearance reached the Toronto Fire Department, more than 100 active and former firefighters traveled down to Wilmington to aid in the search. And over the course of the following week, a total of over 6,000 people worked in shifts in an attempt to bring him home safely. Thankfully, 6 days after going missing, Danny was found alive and well, but in a place that no one ever expected him to show up. Danny wasn't in New York at all, nor was he in Canada. He was almost 3,000 miles away, in the state of California. The story of his re-emergence began at around 9:30 a.m. on Tuesday, February 13th. Danny's wife was in a meeting with one of the search parties near Lake Placid when she received a very bizarre phone call from a phone number she didn't recognize. Her phone had been ringing almost non-stop all week, so it wasn't unusual to receive such a mysterious call. But when she picked up the phone and heard the voice on the other end, her knees just about buckled with relief. It was Danny, using an old pet name for her that he'd used for years. When she asked where he was, he told her he was on the other side of the country, at Sacramento Airport. Danny's wife could tell just from his voice that he was very unwell, so she told him to hang up, seek help, and inform those who came to his aid that he was a missing person. Sacramento police rushed to Danny's aid, finding him in a state of extreme disorientation at the airport's car rental terminal, still wearing the ski clothes he had on when he went missing 6 days prior. He had no idea what day it was, and when asked to describe a nearby road sign in order to determine his state of mind, he mistook the obvious blue for a bright green. He was also in possession of a brand new iPhone, having no idea where he'd bought it, and when he returned home, those that knew noticed that he'd gotten a haircut in the time that he'd been missing. When asked how he'd gotten to California, Danny claimed that he couldn't remember and was the first person to suggest that his patchy memory was down to some kind of head injury he'd suffered while skiing. However, he did have vivid memories of sitting in the passenger seat of an 18-wheeler and that he'd slept a lot during his journey. Following a brief, on-the-spot assessment, Danny was quickly taken to a nearby hospital to be checked over for a possible head trauma. Yet surprisingly, he was soon discharged with no signs of any injuries being found. According to a Sergeant Sean Hampton of the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department, police officers conversed with Danny for quite some time at the airport, and all of them were sufficiently confident that he was not under the influence of drugs or alcohol. They came to the conclusion that Danny had been dropped off at the airport on the night before he was found, and that based on what little he could remember, must have slept roughly near Richards Boulevard before making his way to the airport just before dawn. Given how mysteriously fascinating Danny's case was, it wasn't long before the national media was engaged in a comprehensive search for the truth. Pictures of Danny, as well as the clothes that he was wearing at the time of his disappearance, were broadcast all over the United States and Canada, in the hopes that someone who encountered him on his journey might come forward to share what they knew. A particular amount of effort was poured into an attempt to find the truck drivers that Danny had ridden with on his 6-day journey. But despite the massive amount of publicity, not a single one of them came forward to identify themselves. It was only 6 months after being back in his native Toronto that Danny believed he had pieced together a solid picture of what had happened during the 6 days he was missing. In an interview with a major Canadian news outlet, Danny stated that the whole ordeal had started when he made a wrong turn while skiing down Whiteface Mountain. After taking this wrong turn, Danny believed he had taken a nasty fall, banged his head, and lost consciousness. Then, after waking up, he walked to the main ski lodge only to find it was closed. In reality, this is highly unlikely as rescue teams were searching this area intensively, and it's more probable that he mistake the children's programming area for the main lodge, a place that was most definitely closed at the time of his disappearance. Being extremely dazed and confused at this point, Danny claimed he walked all the way to a nearby highway before thumbing down a ride from a passing trucker. It's here that his memory becomes very patchy, and that he only remembers vomiting at a truck stop before learning that he was halfway across the country in the state of Utah. He remembered experiencing a crushing headache and intense fatigue during this moment of lucidity, and that all he wanted to do was sleep as he continued his journey west. Towards the end of the journey, the mysterious trucker who gave Danny a ride claimed that they had reached what he called the end of the line before dropping him off in Sacramento. Danny claimed that he couldn't remember the driver's name or what they spoke about, and to this day the identity of the trucker remains completely unknown. Upon reaching downtown Sacramento, Danny claimed that he suddenly realized the gravity of his situation, and he knew he needed to contact his loved ones. It's then that he took out $1,000 in cash from a credit card in order to buy a phone, but that he had no idea how he'd gotten hold of the card itself. It's also somewhat of a mystery that he didn't just use a payphone or buy a cheaper variety of phone if it was just to make one phone call. But of all the mysteries this case consists of, this is by far one of the minor ones. A bigger mystery is why, after Danny realized that he was on the opposite side of the United States, as well as a missing person, he chose not to contact family or call 911, but instead opted to sleep on the streets overnight. It's possible that he still felt exhausted and wasn't thinking properly, but the man himself had no concrete explanation for his behavior at that point. The next morning, still in his ski clothing, Danny hitched a ride to Sacramento Airport, and it's around this time that he claimed he suddenly remembered his wife's phone number. He then made contact with her, and the rest we already know. Medical professionals have suggested that Danny's bizarre behavior could have been caused by one of two things. Dr. Charles Tater, a Toronto-based brain surgeon, believes that Danny was suffering from retrograde amnesia, the loss of memory resulting from a blow to the head. If Danny had indeed suffered a head injury after his wrong turn, it's possible that the resulting concussion caused gaps in his memory. Yet retrograde amnesia tends to last anywhere from a few seconds to 48 hours, meaning it wouldn't account for the entirety of Danny's memory loss. On the other hand, Dr. Jennifer Ryan, a senior scientist at Toronto's Rotman Research Institute, argues that Danny experienced another form of amnesia in the form of a dissociative fugue state. Derived from the Latin word for flight, a fugue state is a rare mental condition which can be triggered by a head injury, but can also be caused by a traumatic event or emotional disturbance. People with dissociative fugue have been known to temporarily lose their sense of personal identity before impulsively wandering far from their usual surroundings. They may not show any signs of illness or injury, but instead exhibit radically different behavior and have extreme difficulty remembering who or where they are. Dr. Ryan states that subjects typically don't remember the traveling itself. Rather, their memory kicks in when they find themselves in a new, unfamiliar location. The real problem with amnesic episodes like this is that some subjects never fully recover these lost moments, leaving them with what are known as islands of memory that remain forever lost to them. This may well prove to be the case with Danny Philippidis, meaning the missing pieces to the puzzle might never be unearthed. Incidents like Danny's